issues I was having with YouTube are unique to me. Apparently some friends of mine have watched some of the videos that were recorded today and are telling me that the quality is fine. So I don't see the point of trying to cut the live stream angle out of the presentation here. Just as long as we end up with a quality video for all the folks who want to go see this content on YouTube later, and maybe aren't following along so closely on Twitch. So yeah, I think maybe my internet connection is having some problems. I'm going to have to be watching the connection quality just to see what's going on here. So anyway, we've got another fairly short section here, the introduction of the Open Society and its enemies, and we're just going to get right into it, and we're going to knock this out and then upload it to YouTube, see how the quality is, and yeah, hopefully get a handle on what exactly the best way to present this content is. I think part of it may be that my internet connection is not strong enough for me to be able to broadcast during primetime hours. So I may just have to avoid something like the 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. window here in my time. So, you know, just kind of rolling with the punches here and learning the kinks of the system as we go. I've switched over to water. No more caffeine today for me. Alright everybody, so here we are at the introduction. I wanted to play a little bit of music at the beginning. That was the Stiff Little Fingers, and they're one of my favorite bands. It made me pretty happy earlier to read about Karl Popper's love of music, because I think that to some extent all of the great philosophers that we're going to be looking at who really have a voice and really have a lot to say are going to be people who are into music to one extent or another, and I think that's just fascinating. So yeah, check them out. The Stiff Little Fingers. The album is called Nobody's Heroes. It came out in 1980, so we're getting into classic rock territory here. Some people think of Zeppelin. I think of the Stiff Little Fingers. Jake Burns, if you ever watch this, shout out to you, my man. I saw you guys in Austin last year, and you were great. Still, it's amazing. But okay, so here's the introduction to the Open Society and its enemies. And Karl Popper starts us off with a quote from Immanuel Kant. He says, "I do not wish to hide the fact that I can only look with repugnance upon the puffed-up pretentiousness of all these volumes filled with wisdom, such as are fashionable nowadays. For I am fully satisfied that the accepted methods must endlessly increase these follies and blunders, and that even the complete annihilation of all these fanciful achievements could not possibly be as harmful as this fictitious science with its accursed fertility." And so what Kant's looking at there, it looks like, is pseudoscience, which of course is something that Popper himself is extremely interested in. So let's just go ahead and move right into the text. It says, "This book raises issues which may not be apparent from the table of contents. It sketches some of the difficulties faced by our civilization. A civilization which might perhaps be described as aiming at humaneness and reasonableness, at equality and freedom. A civilization which is still in its infancy, as it were, and which continues to grow in spite of the fact that it has been so often betrayed by so many of the intellectual leaders of mankind. It attempts to show that this civilization has not yet fully recovered from the shock of its birth, the transition from the tribal or closed society with its submission to magical forces to the open society, which sets free the critical powers of man. It attempts to show that the shock of this transition is one of the factors that have made possible the rise of those reactionary movements which have tried, and still try, to overthrow civilization and to return to tribalism." I mean, wow, that is a forward thought. It sounds like it could have been written yesterday. And it suggests that what we call nowadays totalitarianism belongs to a tradition which is just as old or just as young as our civilization itself. It tries thereby to contribute to our understanding of totalitarianism and of the significance of the perennial fight against it, it further tries to examine the application of the critical and rational methods of science to the problems of the open society. It analyzes the principles of democratic social reconstruction, the principles of what I may term piecemeal social engineering, in opposition to utopian social engineering, as explained in Chapter 9. And it tries to clear away some of the obstacles impeding a rational approach to the problems of social reconstruction. It does so by criticizing those social philosophies which are responsible for the widespread prejudice against the possibilities of democratic reform. The most powerful of these philosophies is one which I have called historicism. The history of the rise and influence of some important forms of historicism is one of the main topics of the book, which might even be described as a collection of marginal notes on the development of certain historicist philosophies. A few remarks on the origin of the book will indicate what is meant by historicism and how it is connected with the other issues mentioned. So he's already introducing the concept of historicism, which is a thing that he is going to spend a lot of time in this book critiquing. For Popper, historicism is a worldview that he finds to be incredibly problematic in many ways, and he's going to trace the origins of historicism and then argue that the closed worldview that historicism presents is perhaps the greatest threat facing mankind. And he's got the historic perspective to do a great job with that argument. So I was flattered and very, very happy when I saw that people are interested in doing this book, because this is perhaps the most relevant book that we could possibly choose for our current day and age to read. So let's go ahead and continue moving on. Although I am mainly interested in the methods of physics, and consequently in certain technical problems which are far removed from those treated in this book, I have also been interested for many years in the problem of the somewhat unsatisfactory state of some of the social sciences, and especially of social philosophy. This, of course, raises the problem of their methods. My interest in this problem was greatly stimulated by the rise of totalitarianism and by the failure of various social sciences and social philosophies to make sense of it. In this connection, one point appeared to me to be particularly urgent. One hears too often that the suggestion that some form or other of totalitarianism is inevitable. Many who, because of their intelligence and training, should be held responsible for what they say, announce that there is no escape from it. They ask us whether we are really naive enough to believe that democracy can be permanent, whether we do not see that it is just one of the many forms of government that come and go in the course of history. They argue that democracy, in order to fight totalitarianism, is forced to copy its methods and thus to become totalitarian itself. Or they assert that our industrial system cannot continue to function without adopting the methods of collectivist planning. And they infer from the inevitability of a collectivist economic system that the adoption of totalitarian methods of social life is also inevitable. I don't know what happened there. Totalitarian forms of social life is also inevitable. Such arguments may sound plausible enough, but plausibility is not a reliable guide in such matters. In fact, one should not enter into a discussion of these specious arguments before having considered the following question of method. Is it within the power of any social science to make such sweeping historical prophecies? Can we expect to get more than the irresponsible reply of the soothsayer if we ask a man what the future has in store for mankind? This is a question of the method of the social sciences. It is clearly more fundamental than any criticism of any particular argument offered in support of any historical prophecy. A careful examination of this question has led me to the conviction that such sweeping historical prophecies are entirely beyond the scope of scientific method. The future depends on ourselves, and we do not depend on any historical necessity. There are, however, influential social philosophies which hold the opposite view. They claim that everybody tries to use his brains to predict impending events, that it is certainly legitimate for a strategist to try to foresee the outcome of a battle, and that the boundaries between such a prediction and more sweeping historical prophecies are fluid. They assert that it is the task of science in general to make predictions, or rather, to improve upon our everyday predictions.
I found this on the web for did it is the task of science in general to make predictions. Check it out.
Siri, go away. I don't know what happened just then. I think Siri thought that I was talking to her. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, I'm not even sure what device that happened on. I don't know where she was talking to me from. But yeah, hopefully she is turned off now. So let's get back to this. Where were we? This is a question of the method of the social sciences. It is clearly more fundamental than any criticism of any particular argument offered in support of any historical prophecy. Wait, that can't be right. No, we were into the next paragraph here. Oh, yeah, fluid. That's where we stopped. Okay, I apologize. Okay, they assert that it is the task of science in general to make predictions, or rather to improve upon our everyday predictions and to put them upon a more secure basis, and that it is in particular the task of the social sciences to furnish us with long-term historical prophecies. They also believe that they have discovered laws of history which enable them to prophesy the course of historical events. The various social philosophies which raise claims of this kind, I have grouped together under the name historicism. So that's what historicism is, right? It's this idea that you can figure out what's going to happen next on the historical level, which Popper is just going to completely eviscerate as a view, and which I don't think that anybody should believe that either. I think it's a fairly baseless claim, let's just go ahead and say. Okay, alright, let me get a drink. Good water. Okay, elsewhere, in The Poverty of Historicism, I have tried to argue against these claims, and to show that in spite of their plausibility, they are based on a gross misunderstanding of the method of science, and especially on the neglect of the distinction between scientific prediction and historical prophecy. While engaged in the systematic analysis and criticism of the claims of historicism, I also tried to collect some material to illustrate its development. The notes collected for that purpose became the basis of this book. The systematic analysis of historicism aims at something like scientific status. This book does not. Many of the opinions expressed are personal. What it owes to the scientific method is largely the awareness of its limitations. It does not offer proofs where nothing can be proved, nor does it pretend to be scientific where it cannot give more than a personal point of view. It does not try to replace the old systems of philosophy by a new system. It does not try to add to all these volumes filled with wisdom to the metaphysics of history and destiny, such as are fashionable nowadays. It rather tries to show that this prophetic vision is harmful, or that this prophetic wisdom is harmful, that the metaphysics of history impede the application of the piecemeal methods of science to the problems of social reform. And it further tries to show that we may become the makers of our fate when we have ceased to pose as its prophets. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we are small things, we're individuals. History is something that's made at the collective level. And as individual people, we are sometimes going to be tempted to make the effort, right, to figure out what's coming next. In fact, I do this all the time with the markets, and it's notoriously difficult. because markets are an emergent phenomenon that results from many people making decisions upon similar or different information about the same subject at the same time. Popper is arguing something very, very similar here. There's nothing terribly controversial about this. Okay, let's go ahead and continue on. In tracing the development of historicism, I found that the dangerous habit of historical prophecy, so widespread among our intellectual leaders, has various functions. It is always flattering to belong to the inner circle of the initiated and to possess the unusual power of predicting the course of history. Besides, there is a tradition that intellectual leaders are gifted with such power, and not to possess them may lead to loss of caste. The danger, on the other hand, of their being unmasked as charlatans is very small, since they can always point out that it is certainly permissible to make less sweeping predictions, and the boundaries between these and augury are fluid. But there are sometimes further and perhaps deeper motives for holding historical beliefs. The prophets who prophesy the coming of a millennium may give expression to a deep-seated feeling of dissatisfaction, and their dreams may indeed give up hope and encouragement to some who can hardly do without them. But we must also realize that their influence is liable to prevent us from facing the daily tasks of social life. And those minor prophets who announce that certain events, such as a lapse into totalitarianism or perhaps into managerialism, are bound to happen, may, whether they like it or not, be instrumental in bringing these events about. Their story that democracy is not to last forever is as true and as little to the point as the assertion that human reason is not to last forever, since only democracy provides an institutional framework that permits reform without violence, and so the use of reason in political matters. So let's just hold up a second. What did we just read? He's talking about permitting reform without violence, and this being essential to permitting the use of reason. So what Popper is saying here is that democracy is the only form of government that can remake itself on the fly without a violent revolution. This actually jives extremely well with political philosophy that's been around for the past couple of decades, that says that the rise of democracy is strongly correlated with the decline of international violence and the decline of war. So I think Popper's onto something here. Again, he has a habit of doing a good job at figuring out what to say. Okay, but yeah, I'm just trying to kind of keep my vocal cords lubricated here. This is actually the last section of this book that we're going to read in its entirety. The rest of the chapters and so on, what we're going to do is go through some highlights, and the reason for that is simple. We cannot just read this book and make an audio book out of it because it's copyrighted. So I believe I'm okay in choosing selections, and I think that the ones that we've looked at thus far are perhaps the most helpful suggestions, just in getting a grip on where we are in terms of the backdrop for this thing, because this is one of the most significant books that we're going to probably ever be able to read. I mean, it's got no peers as far as I can tell in terms of just a social critique of philosophy. And I believe Negative Dialectics by Theodor Adorno does push deeper with respect to matters of metaphysics and so on. But this is really pretty much the cream of the crop here. So enjoy it, because this is one of the best ones we're probably ever going to be able to do. No offense to any of the other ones. But, okay. But their story tends to discourage those who fight totalitarianism. Its motive is to support the revolt against civilization. A further motive, it seems, can be found if we consider that the historicist metaphysics are apt to relieve men from the strain of their responsibilities. If you know that things are bound to happen whatever you do, then you may feel free to give up the fight against them. You may, more especially, give up the attempt to control those things which most people agree to be social evils, such as war, or to mention a smaller but nevertheless important thing, the tyranny of the petty official. I do not wish to suggest that historicism must always have such effects. There are historicists, especially the Marxists, who do not wish to relieve men from the strain of their responsibilities. On the other hand, there are some social philosophies which may or may not be historicist, but which preach the impotence of reason in social life, and which, by this anti-rationalism, propagate the attitude either follow the leader, the great statesman, or become a leader yourself. An attitude which for most people must mean passive submission to the forces, personal or anonymous, that rule society. So he's saying, look, these people are all telling you that you need to be something that is inanimately moved by what we might think of as something like Adam Smith's invisible hand. But he thinks that this is a problem, and he started this introduction, this entire book, in fact, with a quote from Kant, who we've looked at what is enlightenment by him, and essentially we understand here at Underground Philosophy that rationalism, or that the use of the intellect and moral autonomy are closely related. Let's go ahead and just continue moving on. But we do want to understand the sense in which Popper does agree with Kant about liberty. He doesn't think it's moral to try to put everyone under some sort of a leader who makes decisions for that person. He thinks people need to make their own moral decisions. So he says, now it is interesting to see that some of those who denounce reason and even blame it for the social evils of our time do so on the one hand because they realize that the fact that historical prophecy goes beyond the power of reason, and on the other hand, because they cannot conceive of a social science or of reason in society having another function but that of historical prophecy. In other words, they are disappointed historicists. They are men who, in spite of realizing the poverty of historicism, are unaware that they retain the fundamental historicist prejudice, the doctrine that the social sciences, even if they are to be of any use at all, must be prophetic. It is clear that this attitude must lead to a rejection of the applicability of science or of reason to the problems of social life, and ultimately to a doctrine of power, of domination, and submission. Interesting. I wonder if he's just going to completely debase the social sciences for us here. This might be a very interesting little argument to discuss with someone who is a sociologist or perhaps an anthropologist, and just see what they think about it, because I think it's undeniable that there is truth in what Popper is saying here, but I'm also not entirely ready to deny the possibility that the social sciences could recover from these accusations, and I would be interested to discuss the ways in which they perhaps have overcome some of this as I'm reading along here. Okay. Why do all of these social philosophies support the revolt against civilization? And what is the secret of their popularity? Why do they attract and seduce so many intellectuals? I am inclined to think that the reason is that they give expression to a deep-felt dissatisfaction with a world which does not and cannot live up to our moral ideals and to our dreams of perfection. The tendency of historicism and of related views to support the revolt against civilization may be due to the fact that historicism itself is largely a reaction against the strain of our civilization and its demand for personal responsibility. These last allusions are somewhat vague, but they may suffice for this introduction. They will later be substantiated by historical material, especially in the chapter The Open Society and Its Enemies. I was tempted to place this chapter at the beginning of the book, With its topical interest, it would certainly have made a more inviting introduction, but I found that the full weight of this historical interpretation cannot be felt unless it is preceded by the material discussed earlier in the book. It seems that one has first to be disturbed by the similarity between the Platonic theory of justice and the theory and practice of modern totalitarianism before one can feel how urgent it is to interpret these matters. And so that's the end of the introduction to the Open Society and its enemies. If you're watching on Twitch, hello. Feel free to comment. I'm always making a look at the or making eyes at the chat. Oh wow, I see Matthew with 1T said 2 streams in one day. I wish I had time to watch tonight. No worries, Matthew. These are all going on YouTube, and I think there have actually been a total of 5 streams today. So what I'm trying to do is break up the longer form content into fewer videos, so that we can organize them better, and so that it gives me a little bit more freedom as to when to accomplish the massive task of reading this book and figuring out how to put it on YouTube and walk the reader through it without actually doing any kind of copyright infringement or anything like that. We want to stay above board, and we want everything to be legal. So what we're going to have to do is and a little bit of summary, and I promise I'll still go through it with a fine-tooth comb for all of you. So feel free to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. And yeah, this will not be the last video. There will be more shortly. Thank you so much.